Thank you. Nice to be here today. I'm Josh Apfelroth, the corporate partner at Cadwalader, Wickersham, and Taft. Very excited to be here today with an esteemed group of panelists to talk about the future of the shipping industry. To my right is Andreas Hadjipetrou from Columbia Shipmanagement, Managing Director. Mr. Evan Sproviero from Head of Projects at GMS. Mr. Frederick Kenney, Director of Legal and External Affairs at the IMO. Dr. Sadan Kaptanoglu from Kaptanoglu Shipping, as well as President Designate of BIMCO. And Mr. Clay Maitland, Founding Partner of NAMEPA, Chairman of NYMAR, and Managing Partner of the International Registries. So, we all know the shipping industry has suffered through an elongated down cycle as a result of a number of factors, including slowing global economic growth and oversupply of vessels, weakened investor confidence. Recently, of course, we all know we've begun to see a recovery in the market and return to profitability for a number of shipping companies, which has caused, I call it, cautious optimism among ship owners and other industry participants. That said, the hopeful outlook is threatened by a number of uncertainties, increased trade protectionism policies, both from the U.S., China, obviously, as well as Brexit, and other regions, implementation of new environmental regulations, industry consolidation, and the availability of financing for shipping companies remains in flux. The industry's ability to navigate these challenges while remaining conservative and not causing fleet overexpansion is critical to ensure continued market recovery. So with that, I think I'd like to give each of our panelists an opportunity to briefly describe what they believe to be the largest risks and challenges facing the industry. We're lucky enough to have a diverse group of panelists with unique perspectives that vary from each other's, and so I think it would be beneficial to hear each of them talk about what challenges and risks they think the industry faces from their unique perspective. So Andreas, maybe you could start.
Thank you. Well, if I would concentrate on the ship management industry, which is where we are operating, as we all know, the regulations are coming up the one after the other, and at the same time you have all the commercial pressure on oil majors, vetting, approvals, and so on. So there is definitely no discount on the level of operational standards that operators need to have. And this is clearly for us a risk in the sense of not having close enough partnerships with our clients in order to accommodate the standards on the level that they are supposed to be. At the same time, this is also an opportunity because with the proper advice towards the ship owners and the proper management of the ships, you can build up a much better and a much more transparent and close cooperation with the ship owners. So it's both a risk and an opportunity the way that the shipping industry is moving, especially as far as the new regulations and operating standards are concerned.
Great, thanks. Evan.
Thank you. I believe the biggest opportunities right now in the ship recycling space are that we have the chance to improve standards, which have already been greatly improved around the world, and we're seeing them to continue to be improved every day, and certainly quite a bit every year. It's a marketable difference. Also, obviously, there's the opportunity to help balance out the shipping fleets through the recycling of the tonnage. With that said, the greatest risks that I believe we're seeing today is the misinformation in the market. There's a lot of new regulations in place that aren't properly understood. There's also a lot of bad information that's out in the market that's not accurate about safety standards and other standards throughout the recycling yards, in different countries, not just the subcontinent, but throughout the world. And I think the biggest risk overall would be the overfinance of the industry, which we're currently seeing too many funds starting to enter to finance the ship recycling space. And what that's doing is it's creating cash buyers who are over-levered and don't have the opportunity to properly handle losses, therefore having to cut corners on safety issues, which is something that should not be acceptable within the industry.
Great. Frederick, please.
Thanks. Thanks, and good morning, everyone. Rather than talking about risks and opportunities, I think I'd rather address challenges and opportunities for the IMO, and I want to thank the organizers for inviting me, as they do every year. This is a good opportunity to speak to an audience that doesn't often come to the IMO and actually participate in the negotiations. So if I can provide some insight into the process and the outcomes, I think that's really helpful for you all as part of the industry. IMO is celebrating its, this year, 2 anniversaries, the 70th anniversary of the adoption of the IMO Convention and the 60th anniversary of its entry into force and the beginning of operations of the organization. And if you look at what the drafters of the IMO Convention were intending and go back and look at that history, what they were doing then is really what we're striving for today, and that is to create the level playing field for the industry, and doing that through creating a globally adopted, uniformly implemented regime of regulation. And we're still striving for that goal today. Are we there yet? No. And I think when we look at challenges and opportunities, you have to look at it from 2 perspectives. First, look at the regulatory development side. What do we need to do? What regulations are left to be created? And certainly there are some opportunities there. Martin Stopford mentioned in his presentation the decision in April of this year to adopt the initial strategy for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. He mentioned that the goal is for a 50% reduction in carbon emissions from ship, or greenhouse gas emissions from ships by 2050, but also total elimination of greenhouse gas emissions from ships by the end of this century. Now, that certainly is going to be a challenge for the organization. He mentioned slow steaming, that's one option, but the Marine Environment Protection Committee and the member states are going to have to be looking very carefully at a lot of different options, and that work is going to start next month. And that represents a significant challenge and opportunity. Implementation is another challenge and opportunity for the organization. We're going to be hearing a lot today about, and we've already heard a lot about, the 2020 sulfur rules, greenhouse gas emissions. We're going to be hearing about the implementation of the Ballast Water Convention, which will begin in 2020. How the flag states, the port states, and the industry implement those regulations, and whether they're done in a uniform and consistent manner and they're consistently enforced, represents a challenge, but also an opportunity to continue to create the level playing field for the industry. Thanks.
Good morning, everybody. I think we live in a very interesting time, and since the morning, we see presentations and with the opportunities and the risks. And now we talk about the future of shipping. I would rather to go step by step and talk about the near future, which is 2020. Because when we get into the 2020, we already now seeing the trade wars, tariffs, and all sort of political instability, and on top of this we have this 2020 sulfur cap. I personally believe, and that is also the the idea of BIMCO, that whatever we do for environment we must do. So there is no doubt on that. And level playing field is always the biggest challenge and the opportunity at the same time, always. But the daily things, how we prepare ourselves for 2020 is very, very important. And we already, I think say that the industry already decide, and most of the, ship owners will use blend or, low sulfur bunkers. Everybody is focusing on who to pay this. I think as ship owners, we should not even discuss this at all. This is not open for suggestion. Why? Because I think 2020 only can be passed successfully, and this will be our test as an industry, what we can do really for the environment. If the ship owners, charterers, refineries, bunkers, everybody come together and work on this mutually. Otherwise, this will be creating certain problems that will cost us a lot of time, energy, reputation. And so therefore, I think there must be a kind of a soft landing on this issue. That's why also we are, as BIMCO, supporting the carriage ban issue. And I think also we must start to train our crew, our companies. There's a lot of planning ahead of us, and we should take this very seriously. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. Clay?
Thank you, Joshua. Good morning. I wear several hats, as Joshua indicated, and one of them is that I'm one of the principal owners of the Marshall Islands Ship Registry. And in preparing for and thinking about what I was going to say today, we feel, and we've thought about this a great deal, that the biggest threat that we face, and we do face threats, there are risks in the road ahead, which were alluded to very articulately by Martin a few minutes ago when he spoke. We have just passed the 10th anniversary of the collapse of Lehman Brothers and the 11th anniversary of the collapse of a firm that's less well known and remembered today, Bear Stearns. It was the beginning of the Great Shipping Recession. The Great Shipping Recession that we are still in, I would suggest, began with those two events in 2007 and 2008. We have not yet pulled out of those recessions, that recession. Anybody who looks at the slides that Martin Stofford was showing us a few minutes ago can see very clearly that we have not pulled out. What haunts me and haunts us, and perhaps I'm a little bit gun-shy because I'm the oldest person up here, and I also remember previous recessions, that the fact remains that another collapse of international finance markets, credit markets, is indeed possible. And as Martin very briefly said, he skated over it, but he thinks it is likely, and I do too. I think that within the next 10 years, we're not really going to be talking about scrubbers. We're not going to be talking about the Ballast Water Convention. We're going to be talking about the depleted state of the private sector in the global shipping industry. When we were here, we weren't here, we were in Moorgate last year for this conference. We were not talking about tariff wars. We are now. We were not talking about a no-deal Brexit and the problems that might cause with trade in Europe, not just with this country. We are now. We were not talking about ruptures or breaches or damage to the global maritime supply chain. We are now. At least I wasn't talking about it. Maybe somebody else was. Is another collapse of the capital markets possible? Very definitely. What will the effect of that be on all the other things that we've just talked about here? And I think we need to be very realistic about this. Certainly, in terms of our projections and in what we are thinking about, and I'm particularly mindful of what Fred Kenney has just mentioned, and Sadan, we have to look at what the shipping industry is going to be capable of doing in the next 10 years. And I say 10 years because these recessions, as Martin indicated, seem to have a 10-year life cycle. They come back again and again. And I've seen them since I really got active in this end of the business back in 1976. I'm like Joshua, I'm from New York, and you're all familiar, I suppose, with the Frank Sinatra hit New York, New York, which has become sort of the anthem for New York City. One of the phrases in New York, New York, if you can forgive me for not singing it, is the term King of the Hill. China is still the King of the Hill, and hopefully for the foreseeable future will continue to be an engine that powers a great deal of the commercial shipping industry. But there again, if the all bets are off, or as you would say here in London, all wagers are off, now that the trade war that we have been talking about has become a reality. If I sound rather bleak, it's because I am. When the capital markets began to crumble in 2007, they did not involve shipping. Shipping was not involved in the collapse of Lehman Brothers. Shipping was not involved in the collapse of Bear Stearns. Shipping was not involved in the gradual collapse of RBS, Northern Rock, or any of the economic crises that struck the British banking system at that time. Effects that, as you all know, are still with us today, here and throughout the world. Can it happen again in a different way? I would say yes. And I think that what we discuss here today and what we look in terms of our own business projections and plans for the next 10 years, we must take that into account. Thank you.
Thanks, Clay. So appreciate that. Let's talk a little bit more about the 2020 deadline. And Sadan had some very interesting points about collaboration among industry participants and ensuring an orderly transition, and that follows recent guidance from the ICS and from BIMCO and a few major flag states around a desire for some more clarity for an orderly transition, perhaps a formal transition period. So Fred, maybe Frederick, maybe if you could talk a little bit about IMO's views with respect to the expectation around such a transition period and ensuring that these rules are implemented in a way where ship owners can where ship owners and all industry participants are able to effectively comply with them while maintaining their operations and business needs.
Well, thank you, Joshua. First, there has been a lot of talk, and you've seen stories in the media of people suggesting that the date somehow will be delayed. I think the chances of that happening are actually very, very slim to none. And even if someone were to propose amending the decision or amending the rules, the IMO treaty process works in such a way that the quickest you can get a rule change into effect is 22 months. And that's past January 1st, 2020. So that date will happen, that the rule will go into effect on that date. And certainly the IMO and the member states have been working to develop, as Martin mentioned, the guidelines for the implementation of the 2020 sulfur rules should be approved by the Marine Environment Protection Committee this fall. They had a working group meeting that was quite productive in July. It's a solid set of guidelines that the industry can use. You have heard some talk, and there has been a paper submitted to the current MEPC, and BIMCO is one of the sponsors, regarding the experience building phase, as they term it. And that certainly will occur, and it occurs when any regulation at the IMO is adopted and enters into force. The system, the regulatory system at the IMO is such that it allows for an experience building phase in all instances, and the regime is flexible enough so that if there are adjustments that need to be made or changes that need to be made, they can be made. And there is actually an experience building phase almost built into the regulatory regime right now, because as I said, the sulfur cap will go into effect on January 1st, 2020. If the Marine Environment Protection Committee adopts the carriage ban that they're expected to adopt in October, and it's up to the member states, but the expectation is it will be adopted. That carriage ban won't go into effect until August or September of 2018. So between the time the rules go into effect and the time that a ship that does not have a scrubber has to remove all the non-compliant fuel from its tanks, there is some time built in where there will be lessons learned. There will be the enforcement and compliance ramp up, and we can gauge and look at how the rule is actually being implemented. Thanks.
Thank you. Maybe just one follow-up. As far as compliance goes and inspections go, what's the, I guess, the plan going forward for inspections, scope and timing of those inspections, and any penalties and fees that may be imposed as a result of noncompliance?
Well, the IMO treaty regime across the board is a flag state regime. So in the first instance, it's going to be up to the flag states to ensure that the ships flying their flag are implementing the rules. However, in this case, given the nature of bunkering and that sort of thing, port state control is going to play a significant part in the effective implementation of this rule. Certainly there are devices out there where port state control officers and flag state inspectors can inspect bunkers just fairly quickly and see if the fuel that's being carried in the tanks is compliant. In terms of penalties, that again is up to the port states and the flag states depending on their domestic regime, which I mentioned in my opening remarks. The playing field is not level there. You have a wide variance in terms of how different port states and flag states, how their penalty regime is structured, how their compliance regime is structured, and how uniformly it's enforced. And we recognize that at the IMO, and we're working to narrow that gap, but it certainly is there.
Thank you. Sadan, obviously a lot of talk about, the decision or determination to install scrubbers. I know you wear a number of different hats as a ship owner, shipyard owner, and president designee of BIMCO. How do you see ship owners generally, considering the implementation or installation of scrubbers, and do you see it as as far as a trend goes, more popular decision to install them more recently versus what people had been thinking, it's called even 6 months ago?
Thank you, Joshua. First of all, let me just, comment to gentlemen, if I may. Clay is absolutely right. There is a very big possibility that there might be a storm ahead. And, ship owners are very lucky to do international business. But at the same time, we are exposed to too many risks out of our hands. So what we can do is we have to avoid the eye of the, storm if possible. Because, we have a very famous word, we keep on saying that, seas will always be high. You just, have to know, sail on it. But the thing is, when there is an eye of the storm, then there is no, nothing you can do. So we have to be very careful about this. But there is a little we can do. And I think the biggest thing we can do, we can keep on, our focus on the supply side, because, eventually whatever happens in the economies, demand is always, rising in a way on the horizon. But we are ruining, whole game for us as a ship owners by ordering more vessels, and more vessels. And thank you so much, Frederick, because, IMO has been doing a great job. Sometimes, individual ship owners, we do, complain. But, if you think the vast, the members of this organization, and to be able to come up with a, agreed regulation on the whole maritime industry is something very difficult and very hard to achieve. And we always support IMO. We should always support IMO because we have to ignore the regional regulations. That is very, very dangerous for shipping. And when it comes to the scrubbers, I think the industry mainly is going for the, either blend or low sulfur bunker, but for the bigger tonnage, it makes sense to go with the, scrubbers. And in the shipyards, we see now more requires, and you also on the scrubbers, you see more orders. But even if all the shipyards in the world will be ready to install scrubbers, you cannot pass, even a fraction of the total shipping fleet. But this, vessels happens to be the biggest one. So one way or the other, they should comply with the sulfur regulation. I think that is the most important part of it. But we will see a lot of, daily discussions. I really think it's very important because, as BIMCO, we will always say that, robust enforcement of a regulation. For what? For, keeping the level playing field. And because this regulation will be in the hands of the, maritime states, this will be, we have to see this, how it's going to develop. What is important from our side that we should not penalize the innocent party, because sometimes simply, there is nothing you can do. So that's why we are also, have now a bunker clause, sulfur clause, a contract in the contract. I cannot give you a lot of details about this because it is going to be adopted in November, but I think it will help the ship owners. Also, we are, searching a way if we can have simple things like standard form if a ship owner is not able to get a comply fuel, for example, and we need more guidelines for this. Thank you.
Thank you. And just one follow-up there. So when you say an innocent party, is it, what, maybe could you just add a little more color as to what you would view as an innocent party? Is it somebody who has,
Can we talk across you a little bit, Joshua?
Of course, yeah.
And because I don't want to leave this topic, Admiral
Please
Kenney
do.
has made, and Sadan have made some very good points. One of the things that I think Admiral Kenney might want to comment on is the recent paper introduced by certain flag states, and which addresses a concern that we all should have, namely that non-compliant fuels may be out there. Fuel switching is certainly going to be an issue, and it's not by any means certain that the actual machinery of existing vessels is going to be adaptable to the purpose that we're talking about here. If ships lose power at sea or entering ports, there are going to be major safety issues, which is squarely within the remit of the International Maritime Organization. A number of the major flag states, in fact, virtually all of them, are very concerned about this. We are going to be the lead organizations in implementing the regulations that are coming into force, as we always are. And recent experience has not been very encouraging in terms of what the class societies are able to do as recognized organizations. I'm perfectly willing to explain to you what that means for those of you who are a little bit new to all this. But most of the flag states, including the United Kingdom, use organizations that are not necessarily governmental to implement these regulations and to inspect the ships and to ensure that fuel is tested properly. This, by the way, stretches across nearly all the IMO conventions. What we are concerned about is the safety issues that are raised by all of this. I realize that this is a conference primarily on ship finance, but one of the things that we've learned in the recent years, in addition to the dealing with the economic crisis that hit our industry, is that safety issues do have an economic impact. There is a real impact on ship finance. Who's going to pay the bill for all of these things? When things go wrong, is the IMO going to adjust its perspective to take a greater role, play a greater role in enforcing the conventions and seeing to it that the flag states enforce their obligations under these conventions? Those are very important things that do affect pounds, shillings, and pence. And we are not yet there. in terms of resolving these issues. Just as we were not there when the use of oily water separators came in, and we're still wrestling with some of those implications. 30, 40 years down the road since the idea of oily water separators was first introduced into international law. It's very easy for us to talk about rules, regulations, international conventions, and what's going to happen in 2020, but getting the actual job done is sometimes, as the Germans say, the devil is in the details. I'm sorry, but I didn't mean to cut into you, but
No, please do.
this ain't as simple as it seems to be. And it isn't going to be, going forward, something, well, we passed 2020, my fleet has scrubbers, I'm fine. That's not necessarily true from the ship owner's point of view. You may have scrubbers, you may have all new ships, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to meet the requirements of the international regime. And that's something I think has implications for all of us, including any bankers that may be present here today.
Sure. Well, Frederick, I'd give you an opportunity to respond to Clay's questions.
I see there's only 9 minutes left, and I could easily chew up all that time responding to Clay's
We're both
multiple
lawyers.
questions.
Admiral Kenney is a lawyer. He didn't say so, but he is.
Well, geez, where to start? Certainly, with respect to the potential safety implications that have been raised in the paper that Clay mentioned that was submitted by the flag states and some of the non-governmental organizations at IMO, the Maritime Safety Committee will be looking at some of the concerns that have been raised, or actually all the concerns that have been raised at their meeting in December. There have been issues raised, for example, about using different blends, and if they're incompatible, could it cause your engine to fail? And certainly, fuel switching has been an issue in the past and a safety issue. And I would agree with what Clay says, is that safety issues and environmental issues can become financial issues very quickly if there is a major casualty. And you really need to look. When I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks that we're celebrating anniversaries, well, last year we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Torrey Canyon disaster, which was really a sea change for the industry and the IMO. But if you look at how the industry has improved its safety record and its environmental record since 1967, it is remarkable. And the rate of casualties, the rate of spills is very low. And I think the member states of the IMO are committed to keeping that record and continuing that improvement while improving and strengthening the regulations. So that is certainly on the mind of the member states and the NGOs as they continue to debate the implementation of these regulations and the further development of them. So that's a 2-minute answer to something I could probably talk about for a half an hour.
Thanks. And I guess, Andreas, maybe you could talk a little bit about the charterer's perspective on these issues.
Well, on the charterer side, okay, on the scrubbers, we all know it's a commercial decision between charterers and owners. So our role as a managers in compliance is to make sure that for each ship you have a risk assessment, you have consulted with the owners, and you have given the proper advice with regards to the way forward, whether scrubbers would be installed or not. Even if you don't install scrubbers, you have to see how perhaps you need to modify the tanks, you have to check the piping of the ship and so on. So there's quite a number of things that need to be done on the operational side. Now, with regards to charterers, what we have experienced is that there is not a single charterer that will say, no, I don't want scrubbers. So they would opt for it, and they would say, yes, please go ahead. And then if you ask them, would you pay for it? The answer is no. So it's really a question of how close you are with the charterers and how the ships have been employed. As correctly it was mentioned, for bigger ships it could make sense. But again, it depends who is paying for the fuel. And the bottom line with the charterers is that even if there is a delta that they are willing to pay with regards to the different price for or not going for scrubbers, is very simple, that you need to negotiate not only the cost but also based on the price differential for maintaining the scrubbers and how long this will take. So it's not really a decision that there's a yes or a no. It really depends individually on the ship, on the trade, and the relationship between charter and owner.
So, so they won't pay for it. I think we get that.
Definitely not.
Do they expect, you know, some portion of the savings to be passed through to them,
Well, it depends. I mean, there are some charterers that they are owners as well, and they trade their own cargoes, and we are involved dealing with some of these companies as well, and they have even new buildings that they decide that they go for scrubbers. So that's a category of people that they want to go for it. But the vast majority of the charterers, the way we have seen it, they are selective, and they would not expect that they pay for the cost. Unfortunately, they would expect the owners to pay for it.
Thanks. Evan, from a scrapping perspective, how do you see the impact of these regulations being, you know, affecting or impacting your business? Are you already seeing some changes, and you know, how do you foresee it going in the future?
Thank you. I think going forward, you know, there's a big expectation that all these ships are just going to disappear from the market and that they're probably going to be recycled. We don't believe that to be the case. It's not like this is going to happen in one foul swoop and all of a sudden there's going to be a massive drive of ships towards the beach. It's likely that most ship owners, you know, they're pretty much already planning for this. So we will see some ships that, of course, you know, will feel the effects of this and go to the recycling markets right away. But the odds are it'll be a very gradual change in the industry, and you'll see these ships probably operate, even take a VLCC. On larger ships, it probably makes sense to have a scrubber, but that doesn't mean it necessarily has to be fitted. You know, you'll see older VLCCs probably go towards more, you know, storage business or other types of trades until they phase out because of their dry docking. The same thing with smaller ships. You know, the odds are owners are already planning for this to happen, so they'll just continue to operate the vessels, maybe earn a little bit less, but they'll still operate the ships, even the older ones, and you'll see more of a natural cycle in terms of recycling.
Great. So we're running short on time, but I do want to touch on what Clay was talking about earlier around trade wars, you know, tariffs, you know, the potential for a no deal Brexit. And other trade protectionist policies. So it's kind of a two-part question. Maybe Clay and Sadan is probably the best people to talk to this. But right now, obviously, volumes haven't necessarily materially decreased as a result of the tariffs. But you know, the first question is what impact have you seen today in anticipation of this potentially getting worse, and obviously in reaction to the already imposed tariffs, and what do you view as the perfect storm, right? What's the worst case scenario?
You want me to take that first, Sadan? Just very I will actually be brief for once in my life. I think that the perfect storm is the trifecta, as we say in America, that we have a continued trade war, and I think between the United States and China. I think that trade war is very much influenced by the political and even the military disagreements between the United States and China, which will, whether we like it or not, have the effect of dragging in the EU and other major groups, trade groups within in the global community. I think that's a fact. I think it's a given, and I don't think it's going to get better anytime soon. As far as the potential that I've alluded to of a shipping recession coming again, that's the second part of it, and I think that will have a knock-on effect even to the work, as I said or hinted at, of the IMO. That is a very real possibility that we. And the third thing that you've alluded to is the fact that Brexit may not simply be an Anglo-EU phenomenon, but may in fact have a continued impact on international trade. The latest seems to be of informed opinion, not mine, but informed opinion, is that you may end up with a so-called no-deal Brexit, which could have, local but very serious commercial implications. We should not ignore the fact that we're sitting in perhaps the world's leading shipping capital, with apologies to our Greek colleagues and to my own friends in the United States. London is still the major ship finance center. Any disruption caused by Brexit to that status is going to be, it's going to affect all of us. It's going to affect our industry, it's going to affect finance, it's going to affect insurance, it's going to affect shipbroking. All of these areas are subject to any disruption of the geographic center that is the City of London, the square mile. And I think that is the third possible thing that would, if not damage the industry, would certainly change the calculus of the industry and how it is run. I'm going to a dinner tomorrow night with the people who run Maritime London in another part of the city. And one of the things that's going to inevitably come up at that dinner and discussion, which will include the shipping minister of the United Kingdom, is the challenge posed by Singapore. Now, we're all in a global industry. Forgive me for rambling on, but the global industry that we're in, from my point of view, my company has 28 some odd offices around the world. We're content to do our business from Singapore, from New York, from Piraeus, or from here, but not, the entire industry is not quite in that same posture. And as the power blocks shift, including the power within IMO to get things done, we may see, if we're here again next year and the year after that, we may see we'll know a lot more after March, which is when either Britain, quote, crashes out of Brexit or not. Will be a factor. If that's a factor, we're going to know within a few weeks after Christmas, and it could very well affect the calculus of a great many of the people in the industry. I'm sorry to go on so long. I've usurped your functions, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry.
No, please, go ahead.
I will be very brief, but not like Clay. I will be genuinely.
You will be genuine. You will be truthful. Right.
No,
I'm speaking for President Trump.
Because we have a, I think we have a very fundamental problem, and this is beyond shipping, and after globalization, now the world is global, integrated, and there is a big benefits of it. The biggest disadvantage, if there will be a problem like recession, then it affects everybody, and more than it should have sometimes. And now what I see in the world, that's why I said it's a fundamental thing, that everybody wants the old good world, which is gone and never gonna come back, unfortunately. So that's why we see this war. So that's why we see this projection. Fascism is rising. I mean, hello, guys. So all this is happening because we want to old-fashion our world to exist. And I am sorry, in 10 years' time, I don't see this will happen. We either must change to something else, or we will suffer as long as it takes. Thank you. Sorry for not being optimistic.
Well, on that note, thank you, everybody, for your participation. And I think we're out of time, Nicholas, but appreciate it.
Thank you, Margaret. Always pleasure.